Happy New Year everyone, hope you are doing well. Every second video, at least one person will ask me if they should build this 4-star or that 4-star, or which 4-stars are good if you're new. And until now I've always written out a comment answering in detail. But given how often I get asked, there must be even more people who don't even bother to ask. I've done a top 10 4-stars video before, but in that one I mostly talked about personal favorites and assumed you had them at E2 max. This video is more for new players, for whom materials still matter. It will also be a bit more comprehensive. Unlike my other videos, I'll assume you don't have a bunch of maxed out 6 stars, we will consider whether the operator is worth building for a new player or not, and whether they provide something useful before you E2 max them. Enough with the intro, let's go! Everyone told you to build Myrtle, this is because Vanguards are there to give you DP, and Myrtle makes the most DP. Best thing for a new player is that you can leave her at E1 level 1 forever. She does give more DP with Mastery 3, and her killing can have its uses, but 99% of the time she is just used to print DP, and an E1 level 1 Myrtle is almost as good as a fully maxed one when it comes to that. Between Courier, Scavenger and Fang, yeah, the 3-star works too, you should E1 one of them, mostly so you don't have to press Myrtle's skill 50 times through the Annihilation maps, but also because there are a few maps on which you need to block some random trash enemy, while Myrtle generates enough DP to deploy your whole squad. Courier has more defense and Scavenger has more attack. Which one is better is situational, but the situation always calls for Courier. Neither is a DPS, so defense is simply the more useful stat here. Vigna is a super cheap DPS operator. Most tier 0 operators get bad SP costs and nonsense skills. Vigna gets stupidly high attack instead. It's alright at T1 but needs E2 to really shine. At T1 she does high damage to trash enemies that will surprise you. Kami 2 she hits elites instead. That being said, there are many other cheap DPS operators, so she isn't essential. Beanstalk gives lower DP than the other Vanguards, but does a bit more damage than Scavenger or Courier. Not a great trade-off for a Vanguard. She is frequently used in challenge runs because her summon respawns endlessly, and things that don't die are pretty good, who would have thought. She is best thought of as a specialist. You bring her in with a specific purpose in mind, not just for generic DP generation. On to the guards. Jesus, there's too many fucking guards in this game. We were shortening this list. Frostleaf, Bee Hunter, Jackie, Doberman, Conviction. Off to the bad operator Gulag with you. Since I spoke the truth about Doberman, I want to add, just in case my body is found with 3 star-shaped bullet holes at the back of my head, I didn't shoot myself. Estelle is the minimum viable AoE guard. She eats trash for breakfast and heals from it, folds the moment one elite enemy shows up, and is basically useless unless E2. If you're not going to E2 her, you might as well use Popukar. Matuimaru just barely avoids the bad operator Gulag because she can be used to tank some annoying bosses that don't do physical damage. Beyond that she is bad and you probably shouldn't build her. She used to be a bit more useful when she was the only 4-star you could drop on some backline caster, but there are many other operators that do it now. Wu Xiaohei would be in the bad operator Gulag, but you don't have Wu Xiaohei. He's a limited operator that was never in the gacha. Screw you, new 4-star players. For the record, he is alright at E2 max. A bit more niche than Arin, but at E1 he is 100% useless. At low levels, physical is generally weaker than arts because of defensive scaling. Res is a percent damage reduction, so it will lower the damage of your caster by the same amount whether they are E0 or E2 max. Physical damage gets reduced by a flat amount, so lower values are proportionally more affected. Bad guards done, on to the good ones. There are some operators that don't benefit much from E2. Cutter is not one of those operators. You may have heard she is one of the best 4-stars, how her damage is crazy for a 4-star, and she is totally worth building. All of this is true, but not at E1. At E1 she has high SP cost skills with OK damage and a small chance to reset them, and even struggles against enemies with middling death. If you want to use her, you should E2 her, M6 her, get her model. The difference is immense. Utage has massive tits. There was supposed to be a joke here, but I'm writing this shit at 3 AM. That aside, her damage is stupidly high. If there is one annoying elite you'd like to stop existing, she is great for that. Plays more like a very slow, faster deploy that hits like a truck than a typical... What the fuck was this archetype called again? Musha? Enmity? Soul Blade? I can't believe we have a shittier name than Push Stroker. What was I talking about? Tits? Ah, Utage. She is fine at T1, but E2 is a pretty big difference, and definitely worth the investment if you like using her. Hummus has massive tits, the other kind. He's part of an archetype called Reaper, which means he's strong. If you're new and he's the only Reaper you have, you should probably E1 him. If you have other Reapers, then you can E1 one of them instead. Reapers have high defense, heal themselves and do a lot of AoE damage. Being a 4-star, Hummus can actually be killed by elites, but he's great at clearing trash, and trash is 99% of what you're fighting in the early game, so he's definitely worth the E1 on new accounts. Gets relatively little out of his E2, so only bother with it if he makes you horny. Was that a sex joke or a dad joke? I don't know, I'm asking you. Moose and Darin are on the good operator list for the same reason. They do art damage. Art damage is good at low level. They're both also fine at E2 and have some unique niche. Moose debuffs her target's attack, and Darin moonlights as an anti-air sniper, but at their core they both do decent damage and can take a punch, usable against most enemies. Before we move on to defenders, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering if I just forgot to add someone in the gulag. Granted, I'm a million years old, but the dementia hasn't quite settled in yet. Quartz is a hard crystalline mineral composed of silica. Oops, I'm reading from the wrong wiki. Quartz, the 4-star crusher, is decent at lower levels. Physical usually struggles at low level because of its interaction with defense. Crushers have stupidly high stats, so they don't share this weakness. Sufficiently high physical damage is indistinguishable from true damage, so she can give surprisingly good value sometimes. There's this narrative that Quartz is complicated or hard to use because she has negative defense. She is simple to use, just treat her as a ranged operator. You want her to hit enemies, but you don't want enemies to hit her. Arts damage is fine, but when it comes to physical, if she blocks an enemy that does high physical, she will explode. If you use her S2, she will explode. If a ranged enemy with more than 0 physical damage shoots her, she will explode. Just imagine she's a very fragile anti-air sniper and you will be fine. She's not particularly worth E2ing since low level is where she shines to begin with, while all the other physical operators get screwed by defense. And I wouldn't particularly recommend her to new players, not because she's hard to use, but because there are other 4-star ways to deal with high defense at low levels. But if you really want to use her and have nothing else, you can get value from her, sure. Alright, defenders. Durnar is an AoE arts guard. I thought we were at the defender bit. Enemies hit her, she hits back with arts damage. Whether she is useful to you or not depends more on the enemies than your team. If she can block and kill enemies without a Herculean amount of healing, then she will do okay. If she gets 2-shot by a random elite, yeah, she's not ideal. She hasn't been terribly useful recently because she's a bit too easy to kill, but otherwise not an unusably bad operator. I've argued that Spot is better than Gummy at E1 in the past, but this is a bit misleading. Let me clarify. Build either fucking one, it doesn't matter. They do the heal and block job well enough for general content. If you think a tank running 200% crit damage just to kill steel creeps is hilarious, you should E2 Gummy. Matterhorn, the sexy cowman, is bad, don't use him. Anytime someone says anything about Quora on my stream, I dive into an insane rant that I practice in front of the mirror 3 times a day about how Bubble is just as good as Quora, and which one is actually better depends only on whether you need Quora's healing and extra block or Bubble's talent. Yes, small qualification, this is only true at E2 max. Before that, Quora is just always better, because her defense is much higher. E2ing either is worth it though. They get defense so high, most enemies can damage them. And finally, the hottest operator in Arknights and probably the reason you installed this game, the Edgelord Rat, Master of Mice, the Depression Dispenser. Utunada, keep your hands off my rats, you greedy fucks. Wait, shit, I mean, she's bad, yeah, she's very bad and a waste of resources and you shouldn't build her, definitely not. 4-star snipers are the worst. There's like 9 of them and none of them are bad enough to join the guards in the gulag. Yeah, that's a lie. Meteor deserves a spot in the gulag as a sniper, but she's a decent physical damage supporter. As a sniper she specializes in anti-air and still does less damage than the other 4-star snipers anyway. If you E2 her and get her module to level 3, then finally she starts doing more anti-air damage than the other snipers, at her own fucking specialty. 99% of the time she is used because her S1 is a defense debuff. Think of her as a supporter first and a sniper second, and you'll have a better idea of what Meteor is for. Her skins are also like really good, so yeah, E2 her. Jessica has a 75% chance to dodge, she gets that at E1, high enough to be abusable. E2 and Masteries don't increase dodge chance, so E2 doesn't really matter. Mei is a sniper that slows and stuns. Pretty good support. Difference between E1 max and E2 max is pretty big though. Should commit to Masteries and S2, her better skill if you wanna use her. If all you want is cheap early game damage though, the 3-star Cruise will beat any 4-star anti-air sniper at Elite 1. Done with the anti-air snipers. Caper is a fun archetype, attacks faster if targets are closer and slower if they're farther away. Pretty low attack, so not great at E1. Out DPSs the 4-star anti-air snipers at E2 max despite not having a model of her own yet. Definitely E2 if you want to use her. Acid drop does little damage with low range and a higher DP cost than an anti-air sniper, not great at E1. Her talent lets her do more than the 5% minimum damage against enemies with high defense. It can be useful sometimes even at E1, but enemies with extremely high defense and low health are not that common. If you want to use acid drop, she gains faster redeploy and more minimum damage from the model, so it's definitely worth getting it. Umbrio is the first global ranged operator. While she has physical damage, it's not an issue at E1 because her archetype has extremely high attack and she prioritizes enemies with low defense. Stand out when there is some annoying low defense enemy you want to get rid of. E2 makes her skill last longer, increases her scaling, her damage. The model lets her do bonus damage to enemies farther away from her. The difference is pretty massive, and if you want to feel good using her, you should definitely do her. More importantly than the stats though, that's the good shit. You should E2 her just for the sound of her gun alone. Totter is a 5-star sniper. No, I'm 100% serious, his damage is just dumb. He can't get his full damage unless the target is isolated, but if it is, bye bye life. He's functional at E1, but being a DPS, he benefits from E2 a ton. Also the only operator who can shoot invisible enemies without revealing them. Pinecone is another one of those archetypes that trivializes the early game. Even at E1 she has high enough damage to hit past enemies with high defense. She has an unusual skill that builds charges very quickly. Each charge is an empowered attack and you have to manually use the charges. She's okay enough even if you just spam them out for damage, but can gain a ton of value if you make sure not to overkill and line up her S1 charges with the enemy wave. She is a bit stronger than the 5 stars of her archetype when used optimally because she is so efficient. To add to her efficiency streak, you don't need to E2 her. Pinecone gets most of her power at E1, so it's fine to leave her there, and she will perform adequately, even on harder maps. To absolutely nobody's surprise, Click is the best 4-star caster at low level, and probably at high level too. Drone casters have stupidly high DPS and get most of their stats at E1, so no 4-star is remotely close at single target DPS. The stun from her drone can also be useful, but it's mostly a bonus. The DPS is what you want her for. Indigo is awesome, a truly amazing operator with great crowd control and great damage, at E2 max. At E1 her binds are unreliable, her damage is a bit low, especially compared to Click's. Let me explain how massive the difference between E1 and E2 is. Indigo's skill increases her chance to bind. An E1 max Indigo using her skill will have about the same chance to bind as an E2 max Indigo not using her skill. One of my favorite 4-stars, but you absolutely must E2 her if you want to use her. Gitano and Grey share a lot of things. They're AoE casters, their name starts with G. They're Year 0 operators, their SP costs are shit, their damage is shit, E2 doesn't help them much. Grey can at least benefit a bit more from model, because it makes the slow during his skill to have 100% uptime, but it's still a 60 SP cost skill. Instead of them you should get a real AoE caster like Shiryuki. Yeah, you thought I forgot her, didn't you? Shiryuki is considered a sniper by the game. This is a lie. In reality, she is a super long range AoE arts damage operator that happens to do physical without her skill. Her skill cycles at a reasonable rate, and she has higher DPS than Grey and Gitano anyway. She's fine in place of your caster in the early game. Don't think E2 is that important, but if you do E2 her, also get the model. The extra 3 ASPD from it ends up being a 12% damage increase because it lets her do 9 attacks and skill instead of 8. As for the other two casters, Pudding needs her model. Without it she loses damage on every bounce. This archetype's downside was so bad it's probably the reason the model system even exists. When using Haze, consider, does this enemy have less than 50 res? If yes, use Click. Does this enemy have more than 50 res? If yes, have you tried using Physical? Is Haze still the best option? You are shooting at Patriot, Haze is good there. Finally at the medics, Mur is a glorified one-set and goes to the Gulag. Susuru is horrendously overpowered and you should E1 her. Her skill 2 heals for a stupid amount, and the downside of only being able to use it twice per map is irrelevant. You very rarely need more than 2 super strong burst heals per map. Her E2 increases her already disgusting healing by quite a bit, but I wouldn't recommend it. If E1 Susuru isn't enough healing, you are probably doing something stupid, like playing 4 stars only. Gavio is also T1. If you E2 and M3 her, she can feel pretty good to use, but even then she's niche. Gavio has no burst skill, but she has higher consistent healing, so that would be bad if you only have one temporary threat, but if you need to stall something with high damage for a long time, she's better than most other medics. Pure Stream is less bad at E1, but her E2 and model is such a massive upgrade that you should get both if you want to use her. The model removes all of the archetype's downsides and then makes her skill heal 20% more because fuck other medics. I really want to send Chestnut to the Gulag, but sometimes elemental healing is actually useful, and he's all we've got. Still shit though. Perfumer is a fine AoE medic. You can either E1 her and save resources for a higher rarity medic, or E2 her for that sweet global healing aura. Personally, I like the global healing over anything higher rarity medics give, but that's just a personal preference. Earth Spirit is Trash Spirit. Her Rian voice is really hot, we all know this, let's move on. What may surprise some of you is that Deep Cover is also bad. At T1 she only has 3 tentacles, they cost 5 DP and have barely any stats. If you E2 her and model her, she becomes way better, probably one of the biggest differences from model, but that's a pretty massive investment before payback. Wouldn't recommend it to a new player. Unless you really want to use Deep Cover in particular, just level up Scene instead. She is actually functional at E1 and outscales Deep Cover anyway. Roberta is also in the bad at E1 club. As a blocker she is a wimp and her devices are mostly used for the shield instead of the defense increase. She gives 1 shield at E1 and double that at E2, so E2 alone basically doubles her value. Even if you do E2 her, you can skip the model, it's extremely underwhelming. Pudenko is probably a vampire, judging from how she sucked all the E1 awesome out of every other 4-star supporter. She is also so evil she conducts gas warfare in her sleepers, probably the second most evil operator in Rhodes Island, averaging around 0.15 on the Dorothy counter, the Terra standard unit for measuring evil. Pudenko has a decently high attack and a very powerful heal on one skill, and a great AoE slow and silence on the other. An operator that does many things and does all of them reasonably well. Great copium until you get more specialized operators leveled up. She is fine at T1 and her model isn't important, so only max her if you want to inhale poison gas. I've been writing this shit for like 2 hours. Speed round time. Rope is a puller, Shao is a pusher. You need one of those archetypes. They're basic but do the job. Build them. If you want to build another one of the archetype, that's also fine. Don't bother with E2 unless you want the extra pull force for something specific. Gravo is Gravo, you throw her at things to slow them down. Fine to leave her at E1 forever. Verdant has green hair. I was trying to think of a positive. He's a Doorkeeper. The archetype is so broken Verdant managed to dodge the Gulag despite not even having any fucking skills, but all the other Doorkeepers are still better than him, and he has no unique niche among them. Bene is free, so he is only worth building if the hentai protagonist look is really doing it for you. Other Arknights players will tell you that you shouldn't build Jaye because he is useful in base and he gives the most money at E0, but I am an eternal contrarian, so fuck the base. You shouldn't build Jaye because his DP cost is a problem for a new account. While deployed he consumes 3 DP per 3 seconds, or 100% of your natural DP generation. This is less of an issue for a stronger account, because you simply need to deploy less stuff to do the same job, and his module helps with this by reducing the DP cost. But for a new account at low level, the cost of using him can quickly add up, even if you disregard the long-term AOMD cost. If you're willing to pay the high cost though, he is pretty strong even at low levels. His skill 2 lets him 1v1 any enemy with low defense that can't one-shot, which is a pretty big pool of enemies. Ethan is pretty good. Ambushers do surprisingly decent AoE damage due to their high attack. He is very tanky and can be used to absorb a ton of hits from ranged enemies. The crowd control can help stall enemies, though at 50% chance to bind it's a bit unreliable. That's Ethan at E1. Then you E2 max him and he goes through the fucking stratosphere. From 50% chance to bind to 81% chance to bind. This is more than doubling the odds. His bind duration also increases, so when he binds an enemy, he will hit them again before the bind ends. Without question one of the strongest 4 stars in the game at high level. Still decent even at T1, but the E2 power spike is completely stupid. And finally Contrail, as of this video the newest 4 star. Yeah, she's pretty good. The ability to block drones is mostly a gimmick, but it also makes her invisible to ground enemies. This allows her to be deployed in dangerous places safely. 15 SP cost on a 30-second duration is some 6-star bullshit, and I was shocked a 4-star got that. The archetype itself is supremely overpowered, since it's a Lord Guard that goes invisible, a very rare and desirable quality. Being a DPS, she will of course benefit from it too, but she still has her uber low SP costs and invisibility at T1, so not a huge priority. And that's every 4-star currently in the game. Now when somebody asks me what 4-star to build, I'll just link them this travesty